Hello people, it's Dodie, and as you can see, our baby is back together and ready to be painted. But before we paint her, let's look at her and talk about coatings. As you can see, I have sanded her where I thought appropriate and made everything as smooth as I possibly can. It's important for paint that everything be properly sanded before you paint. Now that may not be obvious to some people who work with plastic, but when you work with a wood or wood compound, you need to make sure that it is perfectly smooth. Plastic already comes that way, but wood doesn't. That's the reason it's so expensive to get wood furniture. You can see here that my little thumb now has assorted edges that it should have. It even has a little thumbnail, which I was kind of proud of, seeing as how little it was in the first place. Now, let's talk about coatings. Now, you can use on a doll this size, you can use a primer, and it would do fairly well. Make sure that you do get a wood primer, not just a general purpose primer, because if you're working with oils, which is what I'm going to be doing, using oil-based paint, if you're working with oils, you want to make sure that you have an oil-based primer. The whole point to primer is to get rid of really strange little imperfections to the wood, such as these little black marks that you can see. Staining, I don't think so. They're not sanding out, so it's an imperfection in the wood as it was made. So you want to get rid of that and give a nice even color surface. And for that we're going to use Gesso. Now, Gesso is a product that is made of water, plaster of Paris, and paint. The whole point to it is to give a nice even surface to these babies. As you can tell, right here I have applied some Gesso, and let's see if we can get it to, yes, you can see it has cracked. It's supposed to. Now what I will do is take another bit of Gesso, hang on just a moment, and fill that crack. That crack is fine. What I want it to do is just give me an even surface. And putting a little more Gesso on it will do the purpose. This side is fine. One little bit, that's all it took. Now, right now there is a tiny imperfection. You can see it here. Where the joinings are not absolutely complete, like they should be. So what I'm going to do is brush the Gesso over it so it fills in. Same here at the top of the head. Now, Gesso is not designed to be a filler. It can be, and that's what I'm using it for right now. But you can see these are very tiny little cracks. It's supposed to give you an even surface for wood. That's all it's supposed to do. It's like primer. As you can see with that ear, it's not going to even out all the way around the ear. Now for me, I don't want it to. But for little tiny places where there may be, and you can see it's already dried, drying up nicely. Just put a second little coat on there. And that side is ready for painting. For instance, right here you can see there's some unevenness where the edge of the piece has given little holes. They're not really big, and it's not big enough to actually use filler that we made. But all you have to do is take the gesso is thicker than the paint that you would use. So it fills in just those little imperfections to give an absolutely smooth surface to what you're painting. Now, can you sand gesso? Yep, sure can. But why? Like I said, gesso is not a filler. It's not designed to be a filler. If you use less water, and you can see I'm putting it on with a paintbrush, an ordinary old soft paintbrush. If you put it on with a paintbrush, it's obviously thin. If it's thicker than this, or much thicker than this, it becomes spackling. It is not, gesso is not designed to be a filler. Now, gesso was developed in the Middle Ages to give a smooth surface, just as you're seeing me do, to wood, and to cover imperfections. Remember this little piece here with the little black spot on the baby's cheek? Just a little bit, not heavy coats, just a little thin brush takes care of that to the point where we can put color on without the other bleeding through. If you're putting it on with a brush, the odds are really good that you're getting it on fairly thin, as you can see. Back to my history lesson. Gesso was developed to give a nice, even color and texture to wood, because that's what artists painted on. You'll see in the icons of the Russian Orthodox religion that they painted directly on wood. As a result, their colors are a little darker on the wood. Like I said, during the Middle Ages, this was developed to give white, oh, a gorgeous white, even color, so that those brilliant handmade oil paints would shine. Gold would show up as gold, not a dull copper. Do you need to sand this? No. See where the other is already dry? Now after we do this, I will have something that will hold color quite well without losing the detail in the piece. The details like the curls. So think of it as a protective coating to give a nice white. Base for the rest of your painting. Now, do you sand as a matter of course? No. If you happen to have got a little carried away and didn't quite make the joints between where you painted and where you didn't, or you ended up with a ridge, fine. You can, little light sanding will take care of that. But remember, people, this is plaster, and plaster has dust. It is very dusty. If you've ever gone in and done repair work on your house and used plasterboard, what they call drywall, you know how messy it is. When plaster dries, unless it has a fixative, like the paint, you're going to end up with messes. So the dust you get from sanding it is definitely a problem. But once again, you're not using it as a filler. You're using it as a base so that you can paint and bring out all the details of the work. And that's all it's designed for. Now, having said that, you saw that I did use it as a filler. Well, yeah, but it's not a filler for a hole. It's a filler to make sure that the paint will have something fairly smooth to go on, because paint is going to fill in some holes too. We all know that. See? Nice and smooth. And you can't be everywhere at once. Now some of this little bitty stuff, it just disappears right under it. You don't have to add another layer of protection to the wood. It's just there. Now for those of you that work in acrylics, it's fairly simple and it dries just about like acrylics do. But it's just simply a little heavier base than painting with 3 coats of thin acrylic. It gives you your white base without adding extra weight. And once again, it's really thin. So you can just see now that my doll is ready to be painted. It's got a nice matte coating and it's almost dry. Now, Gesso like I said, was developed in the Middle Ages to give wood a white coating, to give wood a white base to produce true color. And they discovered that if you made it a little thicker, if you made it a lot thicker, it became plaster, obviously, and you could paint in plaster on walls. And that is called frescoes. Gesso was also used to stiffen up fabric. This is an ordinary old piece of t-shirt fabric, and you'll notice here this corner is different color. It has gesso on it, and you can see that you can't move it. They found out that if you impregnated the fabric with gesso, it would be about as stiff as a piece of board. So they stretched canvas over a frame and then painted it with gesso, 3 or 4 coats. This has got 3. And it would act about like a board. Now, for those of you that use acrylic, I'll show you the difference. Of what they saw. As you know, acrylic does fairly well on fabric. You've got a little bit of bleeding, meaning that you're not going to get the nice sharp edges that you do on solid surfaces. But you do with gesso. It doesn't move, which is pretty much the same way as you use as the effect that you get when you have paint on any solid surface. That's a nice hard surface. Now, for those of you that use oil, you know that stuff will spread everywhere if you don't have a properly prepared surface. Once again, it just doesn't go on as evenly. But on gesso, you can shade, and drag your paint like you cannot on unprepared surfaces. So it's always good to have a surface. Now, whether you use a plastic coating or you use a primer or you use Gesso, you need to have a firm surface to work on. Gesso happens to be my paint of choice, my coating of choice, because it dries fast, it covers small imperfections, and it's economical in the long run. So, you get to decide what you're going to use. After all, it's your doll. And in the meantime, I'm going to be finishing prepping my doll, and next time we'll start the painting process. Remember to do all the stuffs, and we will see you on the next episode. Bye-bye.